She refused to sit next to a black doctor, but karma came a minute later. Linda hurried into the city hospital, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She had been running errands all morning, and the heat outside had made her feel tired and irritable. Her bag was slung over her shoulder, heavy with paperwork, a water bottle, and a few other things she thought she might need while waiting. The lobby was bustling with people. Some were seated quietly, scrolling through their phones or reading magazines, while others walked briskly from one counter to another. The sound of distant footsteps, murmurs, and the occasional cough filled the air. Linda glanced around, scanning the waiting area for a seat. She spotted an empty chair in the middle of the room, next to a man she hadn't noticed at first. He was wearing a crisp white coat and had a calm, professional presence. His face carried a gentle, patient expression, and his posture was straight, confident, yet relaxed. Linda instinctively moved her gaze away and frowned slightly. Something about him made her uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. Without thinking too much, she chose another chair across the room, far away from the man in the white coat. She settled into it with a little sigh of relief, arranging her bag neatly on her lap as if to mark her territory. As she sat, Linda noticed the receptionist at the front desk calling out patient names. The voice was polite and professional, but Linda didn't pay much attention. She felt that her needs were more urgent than anyone else's. A young nurse passed by, carrying a clipboard, and smiled politely at her. Linda barely returned the gesture, too absorbed in her own thoughts. She felt tired, annoyed at the slow pace, and convinced that she deserved faster attention. Across the room, the man in the white coat continued quietly with his work. He occasionally glanced at the patients, offering polite nods and warm smiles. Some of the people in the waiting area looked at him with respect and trust. Linda, however, remained distant, her eyes fixed on the floor, her mind wandering through a mix of irritation and impatience. She had always been someone who liked things to happen on her schedule. Waiting, especially for long periods, made her restless and easily frustrated. Minutes passed, and Linda's impatience grew. Every time she heard the receptionist call a name, she mentally counted the people who were being served before her. She tapped her fingers against the armrest, muttering under her breath, "Why is this taking so long? I can't believe they are so slow." Her voice was low, but the irritation in it was unmistakable. Some of the people nearby glanced at her, sensing her frustration, while others ignored her completely. The man in the white coat finally stood and began walking toward a consultation room. As he did, he accidentally dropped a small folder he had been holding. It slipped to the floor with a soft thud. Linda noticed it immediately and felt a tiny spark of satisfaction, thinking, "See, he's not as perfect as he looks." She shook her head slightly, internally feeling that her earlier judgment had been justified. Despite her unease, Linda continued scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice anything around her. She read some news articles, answered a few messages, and occasionally glanced toward the receptionist to see if her name had been called yet. The minutes dragged on, and she grew increasingly anxious. She was someone who hated feeling helpless or overlooked, and sitting in a waiting room for an unknown amount of time was testing her patience more than she liked to admit. A nurse approached her, clipboard in hand, and spoke politely. "Ms. Linda, your appointment is ready. Please follow me." Linda hesitated, straightening her posture and looking around. She wasn't quite ready to give up her sense of control. "Wait a minute," she said sharply. "I've been waiting longer than some of these other people. Can't I go first?" The nurse's smile remained polite but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We call patients in the order they are scheduled. Please come this way." Linda let out a small, annoyed sigh but reluctantly stood up, adjusting her bag and smoothing her clothes. As she walked toward the consultation rooms, she couldn't help but glance again at the man in the white coat. He was moving with calm efficiency, greeting patients as he went. Linda's mind began to fill with assumptions. She didn't know him personally, but she was convinced that he must be new or inexperienced. Her prejudice whispered that his calm demeanor was perhaps just a facade, and she doubted his ability to handle patients as well as she expected. The hospital hallway was quiet compared to the bustling lobby. Soft lights illuminated the corridor, and the walls were painted a neutral cream color. Linda walked briskly, keeping her head high, her expression firm. She had always believed that confidence commanded respect, and today, more than ever, she wanted to assert her presence. Every step echoed slightly against the smooth floor, reminding her that she was in a place where order and professionalism mattered, something she felt she could manage better than most. She finally reached a door labeled with her appointment number and paused, taking a deep breath. She smoothed her hair and adjusted her outfit once more, wanting to appear composed and ready. As she opened the door and stepped inside, she immediately noticed a chair in front of the desk and a friendly smile greeting her. Behind it was the man in the white coat, the same one she had avoided in the waiting room. Her heart skipped a little, a mix of surprise and discomfort washing over her. She hadn't expected him to be her doctor. Linda froze for a moment, unsure how to react. She had tried to avoid sitting next to him, had doubted his professionalism, and now she had no choice but to face the situation. She felt a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. Her mind raced through excuses, reasons, and even small ways to politely refuse treatment, but she knew deep down that she couldn't. Her health and well-being were more important than her pride, no matter how stubbornly she clung to it. The man in the white coat, sensing her hesitation, maintained his calm and professional demeanor. He gestured toward the chair and said kindly, "Please have a seat. I'm Dr. Thompson, and I'll be taking care of you today." Linda hesitated a little longer before finally sitting down, placing her bag on her lap. She avoided eye contact, fidgeting slightly with her hands, feeling the weight of her own impatience and judgment pressing down on her. As she settled, she noticed how composed and attentive Dr. Thompson was. He spoke in a gentle, reassuring voice, asking questions about her health with genuine interest. Linda felt a strange mix of surprise and discomfort. She had expected someone hurried, distracted, or inexperienced, but what she saw was professionalism, confidence, and empathy. She felt a subtle shift inside her, though she wasn't ready to admit it yet. Minutes passed, and Linda began answering his questions honestly. She noticed how carefully he listened, making notes and explaining things clearly. His calm presence seemed to create a sense of order around her, something she hadn't realized she had been craving in the midst of her anxiety and frustration. She started to feel slightly foolish for her earlier assumptions, but pride still held her back from fully acknowledging it. Outside the room, the hospital continued its usual rhythm. Patients moved in and out of rooms, nurses and doctors worked efficiently, and the quiet hum of activity created a sense of controlled chaos. Linda, meanwhile, sat across from Dr. Thompson, slowly realizing that her impatience and prejudice had almost cost her the opportunity for excellent care. Her thoughts were interrupted occasionally by his questions or explanations, and she found herself paying closer attention, realizing that professionalism and kindness were not limited by appearance or assumptions. By the time the consultation ended, Linda felt a strange mix of relief, gratitude, and reflection. She had come into the hospital angry, impatient, and judgmental, but she was leaving with a sense of calm and reassurance. She still felt a little embarrassed for her earlier behavior, but she also recognized that her assumptions had been completely unfounded. Dr. Thompson had treated her with the same care, respect, and attention he gave to every patient. As she stood up to leave, she offered a small, hesitant smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. Dr. Thompson returned the smile warmly. "You're welcome. Take care of yourself." Linda nodded, feeling a subtle shift in her perspective, a moment of humility and self-awareness that she hadn't expected to experience that day. As she walked back through the hospital lobby, she noticed other patients, the staff, and even the man she had avoided sitting next to earlier. The world seemed a little different now. She realized that her impatience, her assumptions, and her prejudice had almost shaped her experience, but it hadn't. Instead, she had received excellent care from someone who deserved her respect, no matter what her initial thoughts had been. For the first time in a long time, Linda reflected on how quickly judgments could cloud perception, and how important it was to approach every person with an open mind. She left the hospital that day not only relieved about her health, but carrying a small, quiet lesson about patience, humility, and respect. One she knew would stay with her for a long time. Linda left the consultation room feeling a strange mixture of relief and embarrassment. She had been so sure of herself when she walked into the hospital earlier, certain that she knew better than anyone around her. But now, she felt unsettled. Her assumptions about Dr. Thompson had been completely wrong. She had judged him unfairly, and the realization made her cheeks burn with quiet shame. Still, her pride kept her from fully acknowledging it. Instead, she walked quickly through the hospital corridor, adjusting her bag and trying to focus on anything other than what had just happened. As she re-entered the lobby, she noticed the same bustling activity she had seen when she first arrived. Patients were seated, some whispering to each other, some staring silently at the walls, waiting for their names to be called. A young mother was trying to calm her fussy child, while an elderly man shuffled carefully toward the reception desk. Linda moved past them, her mind still replaying the moments inside Dr. Thompson's room. She had been rude without realizing it, avoiding him purely because of a thoughtless prejudice. That thought lingered in her mind like an uncomfortable weight. She found an empty seat near the corner of the lobby and sat down, hoping to collect her thoughts. The chair was hard and uncomfortable, but she hardly noticed. Her eyes wandered across the room, eventually settling on Dr. Thompson as he moved past another patient toward a nearby office. He was calm and professional, greeting each person with the same gentle smile and warm tone he had shown her. Linda felt an unexpected pang of respect. She wanted to hate him for what she had assumed about him earlier, but she couldn't. His presence was commanding yet kind, and she realized that he had handled her with complete patience despite her behavior. While she sat there, Linda's mind began to replay her actions earlier in the lobby. She remembered how she had avoided sitting next to him, the subtle frown she had given when she first noticed him, and the private satisfaction she had felt when he dropped the folder. Each memory now seemed foolish and petty. She wondered how many other people she had judged unfairly in her life, simply because of their appearance or demeanor. The thought made her uncomfortable, but also thoughtful. She realized that prejudice was not only unfair to others, it also robbed her of the opportunity to see people as they truly were. As she reflected, a nurse approached her again, holding a small stack of papers. "Ms. Linda, you need to complete these forms before your next appointment," the nurse said politely. Linda took the forms reluctantly, scanning them quickly. She noticed that some of the questions were detailed and required careful attention, but she was already growing restless. The wait, the forms, the slow pace, it all began to irritate her again. But this time she caught herself. She paused and took a deep breath. Perhaps her earlier impatience had been part of the problem. Maybe if she slowed down, things would feel less frustrating. She began filling out the forms carefully, answering each question honestly. It was tedious, but as she wrote, she noticed her surroundings more. She saw patients quietly waiting, some with expressions of worry, some with hopeful smiles. She saw staff moving with efficiency and patience, responding to questions and guiding people politely. For the first time, she truly appreciated the work that went on behind the scenes. The hospital wasn't just a place where she received care, it was a place where countless people dedicated themselves to helping others. As Linda worked on the forms, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She looked up to see the nurse who had handed her the papers earlier. "Ms. Linda," she said gently, "if you're ready, the doctor will see you shortly." Linda's stomach tightened slightly. Even though she had already met Dr. Thompson, she now felt nervous about facing him again. She had avoided him before, and now she had to sit with him once more. She wondered if he had noticed her earlier behavior. She hoped he had, in his calm and professional way, simply overlooked it. She followed the nurse down another corridor, her steps slower this time. She wasn't rushing anymore. She noticed small details along the way, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with flowers from the hospital lobby, the distant murmur of conversations. It was a small, ordinary world, but she began to see it differently. She realized how much she had missed by rushing through life, judging people without knowing them and focusing only on herself. When she reached the consultation room again, she paused outside the door. Dr. Thompson was already inside, reviewing a patient file. He looked up and smiled warmly, just as he had the first time. "Hello again, Ms. Linda. Please have a seat," he said. Linda hesitated, then stepped inside, placing her bag carefully on the chair beside her. She felt a little awkward, aware of how petty her earlier behavior had been. But Dr. Thompson's calm, friendly demeanor made it easier for her to relax. This time, the consultation was different. Dr. Thompson asked her more detailed questions, explaining medical procedures and potential treatments in simple, clear language. He was patient, taking time to ensure that Linda understood every step. Linda realized how easy it was to misjudge people. His appearance had nothing to do with his skill, knowledge, or dedication. She had assumed the worst based on nothing but her own prejudice, and now she felt ashamed. As the consultation continued, Linda's attitude began to change. She found herself listening carefully, asking questions she had never thought to ask before, and appreciating the explanations he gave. She realized that knowledge and experience mattered far more than appearances. She also noticed the respect and trust that other patients seemed to have for Dr. Thompson. It wasn't just her perception, it was real. People recognized his skill and professionalism. She had almost missed out on receiving the best care simply because of her own unfair assumptions. After a few more minutes, the nurse returned with some test results. Dr. Thompson explained them clearly, outlining the next steps for Linda's treatment. She listened attentively, realizing how lucky she was to have a doctor who was not only skilled, but also genuinely caring. She remembered the small folder incident earlier in the lobby and laughed quietly to herself. How foolish she had been to think that a small accident meant anything about his ability. Life had a strange way of teaching lessons, she thought, and this was one she would not forget. Once the consultation ended, Linda felt a mix of gratitude and humility. She thanked Dr. Thompson sincerely, realizing that her earlier impatience and prejudice could have caused unnecessary delays in her treatment. He smiled warmly, nodding, as if acknowledging her thanks without making her feel ashamed. She left the room with a lighter heart, feeling that she had learned something valuable about patience, humility, and respect. Outside the consultation room, Linda walked slowly down the corridor, noticing the activity around her. The hospital staff moved efficiently, patients went about their routines, and the calm atmosphere continued despite the busyness. Linda reflected on how much she had misjudged the world and the people in it. She had assumed things based on appearance, allowed impatience to control her, and almost missed out on the very help she needed. It was a humbling realization. She found a seat in the waiting area again, this time with a different perspective. She observed people patiently waiting, understanding that everyone had their own worries and stories. The young mother was still trying to calm her child, but now Linda felt a sense of empathy rather than irritation. She noticed the elderly man at the reception desk, patiently answering questions, and she felt a quiet admiration for the calmness with which he handled himself. She realized that patience and respect were qualities that everyone deserved, regardless of the situation. While she sat there, Dr. Thompson walked past, heading to another patient. Linda noticed how smoothly he moved, confident yet unhurried. She felt a wave of respect for him, realizing that his professionalism went far beyond appearances. He was skilled, kind, and genuinely caring, qualities she had initially overlooked. Her own earlier behavior now seemed almost childish in comparison, and she felt a strong desire to be more open-minded in the future. As time passed, Linda continued to reflect on the morning's events. She thought about how quickly she had judged Dr. Thompson and how easily she had allowed impatience and prejudice to cloud her perception. She realized that true character was revealed through actions, not appearances. Dr. Thompson had shown patience, kindness, and professionalism at every step, and she had almost let her own biases prevent her from receiving the best care. By the time she was ready to leave, Linda felt a quiet sense of growth. She had come into the hospital angry, impatient, and judgmental, but she was leaving with a new understanding. She had learned that assumptions could be dangerous, that patience was valuable, and that respect should be given to everyone, regardless of who they were. It was a lesson she would carry with her long after she left the hospital. As she walked out of the hospital, she glanced back one last time. Dr. Thompson was still there, calmly attending to patients with the same warmth and professionalism she had witnessed earlier. Linda felt a sense of gratitude and humility. She had learned an important lesson about judging others too quickly and about the value of empathy and respect. She realized that life often presented moments of learning in the most unexpected ways, and this had been one of those moments for her. Linda stepped out into the sunlight, feeling the warmth on her face. She took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air and the sense of clarity she now carried. She thought about the day ahead and how she would approach people differently from now on. She had seen firsthand the impact of patience, professionalism, and kindness, and she knew she wanted to reflect those qualities in her own life. The experience stayed with her as she walked toward her car. She thought about how easily she had let bias and impatience shape her actions, and how fortunate she had been to receive care from someone as skilled and compassionate as Dr. Thompson. She realized that true lessons often came quietly, in moments that seemed ordinary at first but revealed profound truths upon reflection. By the time Linda reached her car, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Her earlier tension, impatience, and judgment had transformed into gratitude, reflection, and humility. She understood now that the world was full of people who deserved respect and trust, and that her assumptions could blind her to the goodness around her. She had almost missed out on an important opportunity for care, simply because of her own prejudice, and she promised herself that she would try harder to be open-minded in the future. As she drove away from the hospital, Linda felt a sense of calm and clarity. She had learned a valuable lesson about patience, humility, and respect, and she knew it would stay with her. The experience had been humbling, enlightening, and in its own way, transformative. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling grateful for the unexpected wisdom she had gained from a day that had started with impatience and judgment, but ended with understanding and growth. Linda had barely returned to her car when she noticed her phone buzzing in her bag. She fished it out and saw a message from the hospital. "Ms. Linda, Dr. Thompson needs to see you again for further evaluation. Please return at your earliest convenience." Her heart sank slightly. She had hoped her consultation was over, but it seemed there was more to do. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a flicker of annoyance. She was tired, she had errands to finish, and the thought of sitting in the hospital waiting area again was not appealing. But as she thought about it more carefully, she realized that her health had to come first. She had already learned that assumptions and impatience could lead her astray. Taking care of herself mattered more than her comfort or pride. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and decided to head back to the hospital. Her steps were slower this time, measured, more mindful than before. She felt a quiet resolve. When she re-entered the hospital, the lobby seemed both familiar and different. Familiar because she had been there just a few hours ago, but different because she now viewed it through a new lens. Instead of impatience, she felt a sense of awareness. She noticed the patients, the staff, the small details, the soft lighting, the subtle hum of the air conditioning, the gentle murmur of conversations, and everything seemed calmer, almost peaceful. She had been too busy judging before to see these things. As she approached the reception desk, the young nurse who had assisted her earlier greeted her warmly. "Welcome back, Ms. Linda. Dr. Thompson is expecting you," she said politely. Linda nodded, offering a small smile. "Thank you," she replied, her voice softer than before. There was no rush in her movements now, no desire to assert herself above others. She felt more patient, more grounded. Walking down the corridor, Linda felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. She had avoided Dr. Thompson earlier in the lobby because of her bias, and now she had to face him again. She wondered if he had noticed her initial behavior. She worried briefly about embarrassment, but quickly reminded herself that he was professional, and she had already started to change her own perspective. She took another deep breath, steadying herself, and approached the door to his consultation room. When she entered, Dr. Thompson looked up from his notes and greeted her with the same calm, welcoming smile. "Ms. Linda, thank you for returning. Please have a seat." Linda's eyes met his for a brief moment, and she felt a pang of realization. This was the very doctor she had refused to sit next to in the waiting room. The irony of the situation was undeniable. She had spent so much energy avoiding him, judging him unfairly, and yet here she was, sitting in front of him again with no choice but to rely on his expertise. She hesitated slightly, her pride warring with her need for care. But Dr. Thompson's patient and professional demeanor made it easy for her to relax. She sat down carefully, placing her bag neatly beside her. For a moment, she caught herself thinking about how foolish her earlier behavior had been. She had allowed prejudice to dictate her actions, and it had almost interfered with something important, her health. Dr. Thompson began reviewing her previous tests and notes. He spoke clearly and calmly, explaining what further evaluation was necessary and why it mattered. Linda listened attentively, noticing the precision and care in his words. Every explanation was thorough yet easy to understand. She realized that his skill, knowledge, and dedication were far greater than anything she had assumed earlier. Her impatience and judgment had been baseless, and now the reality was undeniable. As the consultation progressed, Linda found herself opening up more than before. She answered questions honestly, shared details about her health she had almost kept to herself, and asked thoughtful questions in return. Dr. Thompson responded with patience, addressing every concern thoroughly and ensuring she felt comfortable. Linda couldn't help but notice how professional and kind he was, and she felt a quiet wave of admiration for his character. She began to feel ashamed of the assumptions she had made simply based on appearance. Then came the critical moment. Doctor. Thompson examined the results of her latest tests and noticed a concerning pattern that required immediate attention. He explained it to Linda carefully, emphasizing the importance of timely action. Ms. Linda, he said gently, based on these results, it's crucial that we begin treatment as soon as possible. Delaying could affect your recovery. Linda felt a chill run through her. She realized that her earlier hesitation to come back could have had serious consequences. Her mind flashed back to the waiting room, to the moment she had refused to sit next to him. She thought of the irony. If she had acted on her prejudice and walked away, she might have jeopardized her own health. A sudden awareness hit her. This was the moment karma had arrived. Not in a harsh or punitive way, but in a quiet, undeniable lesson about humility, patience, and respect. She had almost let bias control her choices, and now she faced the real consequences of that attitude. She swallowed nervously, realizing how close she had come to making a mistake. Dr. Thompson, meanwhile, continued calmly, guiding her through the next steps with clarity and compassion. There was no judgment in his voice, only professionalism and care. Linda's eyes welled up slightly with emotion. She felt a mix of gratitude, embarrassment, and humility. She had been so focused on her own discomfort and assumptions that she had almost overlooked something critical: her health. Now she had to admit to herself how wrong she had been. She wanted to apologize, but words felt unnecessary. She realized that her own self-awareness and acknowledgement of her mistake were enough to mark the change within her. Doctor. Thompson discussed treatment options, explained procedures, and answered every question Linda asked. She noticed how carefully he listened, how thoroughly he explained things, and how genuinely he seemed to care about her well-being. Her earlier assumptions about him being different or inexperienced evaporated completely. In their place, she felt respect, trust, and a newfound awareness of the dangers of prejudice. She marveled at his skill, kindness, and professionalism. During the discussion, Linda remembered the small folder incident from earlier in the day. She had thought it was a sign of clumsiness. Now she laughed quietly to herself, realizing how foolish she had been. That small moment had held no meaning about Dr. Thompson's ability or character. Life had a way of teaching lessons through irony, and she had just experienced one firsthand. The thought made her smile despite the seriousness of her situation. Dr. Thompson then guided her through scheduling the next steps in her treatment, ensuring that everything would be handled efficiently and safely. Linda felt a sense of relief. Not only was she receiving the care she needed, but she was also witnessing the professionalism and dedication that came from true expertise. She realized that she had almost missed out on this simply because of her own unfounded bias. As she prepared to leave the consultation room, Linda paused and looked at Dr. Thompson. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and humility. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice sincere. I really appreciate everything you've done." Dr. Thompson smiled warmly, nodding. "You're welcome, Ms. Linda. Take care of yourself. Remember, being proactive about your health is always the best choice." His words felt gentle but meaningful, a reminder of the importance of responsibility, patience, and respect. Linda stepped out of the room slowly, her mind full of reflection. She walked through the hospital corridor, noticing the small details around her: the soft lighting, the subtle sounds of the staff moving, the quiet hum of conversations. Everything felt calmer now, more organized, and she realized that her perspective had shifted. She had come into the hospital earlier that day impatient, judgmental, and full of assumptions. She was leaving with a new understanding, that people's true character was revealed through their actions, not appearances. Back in the lobby, she saw other patients waiting patiently, staff moving efficiently, and the hospital operating with quiet professionalism. Linda felt a deep sense of empathy. She recognized that everyone had their own challenges, their own worries, and their own moments of vulnerability. She thought about how often she had misjudged people in her life, letting appearances, assumptions, or impatience cloud her perception. She vowed to be more mindful in the future. Linda took a seat for a moment, allowing herself to breathe and reflect. She thought about the irony of the day, the small moments that had taught her such profound lessons. She had refused to sit next to Dr. Thompson in the waiting room, had judged him unfairly, and had almost allowed that judgment to interfere with her own well-being. And yet here she was, safe, cared for, and enlightened. The experience had been humbling, and she knew she would carry its lessons with her. As she waited for the nurse to assist her with the next steps, Linda found herself observing Dr. Thompson as he moved through the lobby. He greeted patients with the same calm, professional demeanor, listened attentively, and responded with kindness. She felt admiration and respect growing in her heart, a recognition that true professionalism and character were not defined by appearance, but by actions and dedication. By the time she left the hospital that day, Linda felt a profound shift within herself. She had faced the consequences of her prejudice and impatience, learned the value of humility, and experienced the quiet power of karma not as punishment, but as a lesson. She walked out into the sunlight with a sense of clarity, her steps measured and thoughtful. For the first time that day, she felt truly grounded. Linda understood now that patience, respect, and empathy were not just abstract concepts. They were practices she could apply every day in every situation. She had witnessed their power firsthand and realized how easily assumptions could cloud judgment. Life had given her a gentle but unmistakable reminder: respect others, trust in their abilities, and approach every situation with an open mind. As she drove away from the hospital, Linda thought about the events of the day. She reflected on her initial impatience, her unfair assumptions, and the irony of being confronted with the very doctor she had refused to sit near. She smiled quietly, feeling gratitude for the lessons learned, and a deep commitment to being more mindful in her actions and thoughts. The experience had been humbling, enlightening, and transformative. For Linda, the day would be remembered not just for the medical care she had received, but for the personal growth that came with it. She had experienced the quiet but powerful consequences of her prejudice, the importance of patience, and the value of true character. She knew that she would carry these lessons with her, allowing them to shape her interactions and choices in the future. Linda stepped out of the hospital into the afternoon sunlight, feeling a quiet sense of relief. The tension and nervousness she had carried all morning had faded, replaced by a new awareness of herself and the world around her. She walked slowly toward her car, letting the warm air wash over her, and for the first time that day, she felt a true sense of calm. Her mind replayed the events of the past hours, each moment revealing a lesson she had never expected to learn. As she settled into the driver's seat, Linda reflected on the day's experiences. She thought about how she had entered the hospital impatient, judgmental, and quick to assume the worst about people she didn't know. She remembered avoiding Dr. Thompson, deciding not to sit next to him simply because of her own unfounded prejudices. At the time, she had felt justified, certain that her feelings were reasonable, but now she saw how wrong she had been. That small decision in the waiting room had been insignificant in itself, yet it had reflected a larger pattern of thinking that had influenced her life in many ways. Linda thought about Dr. Thompson's calm and professional manner. He had never made her feel judged, even though he must have noticed her initial behavior. He treated her with patience, kindness, and respect throughout the consultation, focusing on her needs rather than her past mistakes. It struck her how rare it was to meet someone who could maintain such composure and professionalism in the face of someone's prejudice. She felt a deep sense of respect for him, not just as a doctor, but as a person of integrity and character. As she drove home, Linda considered how often she had allowed assumptions to guide her actions in life. She remembered moments at work, social gatherings, and even casual encounters where she had judged people too quickly, assuming things about them based on appearance, tone of voice, or small details that had no real meaning. The realization made her feel a mixture of shame and determination. She didn't want to continue that pattern. Today had taught her that actions, skill, and character mattered far more than superficial judgments. The irony of the situation brought a small smile to her face. She had refused to sit next to Dr. Thompson in the waiting room, and in that very moment, she had been confronted with the consequences of her bias. If she had walked away, ignored the call, or chosen not to return, she might have delayed necessary treatment and put her health at risk. Life had a subtle way of teaching lessons, and Linda realized she had been given one that she would not forget. It wasn't harsh or cruel. It was gentle, clear, and powerful. When Linda arrived home, she took a moment to sit quietly in her living room, reflecting further on the day. She considered how much stress, impatience, and judgment she had carried before entering the hospital. She realized that all of it had been unnecessary, self-imposed, and ultimately harmful to her own experience. By letting go of these feelings, even partially, she had been able to see the world more clearly, appreciate the efforts of others, and recognize the value of patience and respect. She picked up her phone and scrolled through messages, noticing how often she had reacted quickly, sometimes harshly, without understanding the full picture. The thought made her pause. How many conflicts in life could have been avoided if she had simply slowed down, listened carefully, and approached situations with an open mind? She resolved to practice this awareness more consciously, starting with small interactions in her daily life. Later that evening, Linda prepared a simple meal, but her mind was still occupied with the lessons of the day. She thought about Dr. Thompson again, remembering the warmth in his voice, the clarity of his explanations, and the genuine care he had shown. It wasn't just about being a doctor. It was about the way he carried himself, the way he treated people with dignity regardless of their behavior, and the way he remained calm and composed even in situations that could have been frustrating. Linda realized that true strength often came quietly, through patience, empathy, and consistency. She reflected on her own behavior and felt a desire to change. She had been impatient, judgmental, and dismissive in the waiting room. She had almost let pride and prejudice interfere with something vital, her own health. But now, she felt a growing sense of responsibility to approach life differently. She wanted to be more understanding, more patient, and more open-minded. The experience had shown her that change was possible, even if it started with small, conscious decisions. As she sat in her living room, Linda also thought about the other patients she had seen that day. There was the young mother trying to calm her child, the elderly man patiently answering questions at the reception desk, and the quiet individuals waiting for their turn. She realized that everyone had their own stories, challenges, and moments of vulnerability. Her earlier impatience and judgment had blinded her to this reality. Now, she felt a sense of empathy she had rarely experienced before. Later that night, Linda lay in bed, replaying the events of the hospital in her mind. She remembered the moment she had hesitated outside Dr. Thompson's consultation room, realizing she had no choice but to sit with the very person she had refused to sit next to earlier. That moment had been uncomfortable, humbling, and eye-opening. She realized that karma wasn't always about punishment. It was about awareness, reflection, and understanding. Life had a way of showing her the consequences of her actions, but it also offered the opportunity to learn, grow, and do better in the future. Linda thought about how she could carry these lessons into her daily life. She resolved to treat people with respect, patience, and kindness, regardless of initial impressions or assumptions. She wanted to listen more carefully, judge less quickly, and approach situations with empathy. She realized that the world was full of people deserving of understanding, and that her own awareness could make a difference in how she experienced life and interacted with others. Over the next few days, Linda noticed subtle changes in her perspective. When she went to the grocery store, she observed people more thoughtfully, offering polite smiles and courteous interactions. At work, she paused before reacting to frustrating situations, choosing to respond with calm and understanding. Even in casual conversations, she found herself listening more attentively, appreciating the effort and perspective of others. The lessons from the hospital stayed with her, quietly shaping her actions and mindset. One afternoon, Linda received a follow-up message from the hospital, confirming her next appointment. Instead of feeling impatience or anxiety, she approached it with a sense of calm and readiness. She thought about Dr. Thompson and the care he had provided, and she felt gratitude. She realized that receiving help, guidance, and professionalism didn't depend on personal biases. It depended on openness, trust, and humility. She had learned to trust the process, respect expertise, and recognize the value of patience. As her next appointment approached, Linda reflected on how much she had grown in just a short time. She remembered her initial reluctance to sit next to Dr. Thompson, the irritation she had felt in the waiting room, and the small moments of judgment that had shaped her morning. Comparing that person to who she was now, she felt a sense of pride, not in herself, but in the awareness and growth she had achieved. She realized that transformation often began with reflection, humility, and the willingness to learn from life's lessons. When she finally returned to the hospital for her follow-up, Linda felt different. She entered the lobby with a sense of calm, greeted the staff politely, and moved toward Dr. Thompson's consultation room without hesitation. She no longer felt judgment, impatience, or fear, only trust, respect, and readiness to engage. Sitting across from him again, she felt gratitude for the care, professionalism, and kindness he consistently demonstrated. She realized that her life had been quietly transformed by the experience. By the end of her follow-up, Linda understood that the lessons of the day were more important than any single medical consultation. She had learned about humility, patience, empathy, and respect. She had witnessed firsthand how assumptions and prejudice could cloud judgment, and how awareness, openness, and reflection could lead to growth. She left the hospital with a sense of clarity and purpose, ready to approach life differently. On her way home, Linda thought about the irony of her initial behavior. She had refused to sit next to Dr. Thompson, judged him unfairly, and almost missed out on the care she needed. Yet, through that experience, she had learned a life-changing lesson. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling gratitude for the subtle, gentle way life had guided her toward self-awareness. She knew that this lesson would stay with her for years to come. At home, Linda shared the experience with a close friend, carefully describing the events and her own reactions. Her friend listened attentively and nodded, understanding the depth of the lesson. Linda felt a sense of relief in expressing her growth, realizing that reflection and sharing could reinforce positive change. She understood now that the journey toward empathy and awareness was ongoing, but that each moment of learning built a stronger, kinder perspective. That night, Linda lay in bed, thinking about Dr. Thompson and the quiet professionalism he had shown. She realized that the impact of kindness, patience, and skill extended far beyond the immediate moment. His actions had influenced her deeply, helping her recognize her own flaws, embrace humility, and commit to personal growth. She knew she would carry this understanding into her interactions with others, approaching life with more patience, empathy, and respect. In the following weeks, Linda noticed how her interactions with others improved. She was more mindful, less quick to judge, and more attentive to the perspectives of those around her. She found herself listening carefully, offering support when needed, and appreciating the efforts of others. The small but powerful lessons she had learned at the hospital continued to shape her life, influencing both her personal and professional relationships. Linda often thought back to that day, realizing how a seemingly ordinary event, the waiting room, the consultation, the dropped folder, had transformed her perspective. She had entered the hospital impatient and judgmental, and she left with gratitude, humility, and a renewed understanding of respect. She had experienced the quiet, undeniable consequences of her actions, but more importantly, she had learned to grow from them.